Well, good morning. It is so good to see you all here as we start off our new series here, Parables. And great to have all of you who are joining us online as well. And for you all's sake, the clock, it's just it doesn't have the countdown part. If not, I'll just wing it. I never go long anyhow, so. Now you're all praying. And so, yeah. So we're starting a new series, parables. And so we're going to be looking at these different parables that Jesus taught. And this morning, I'm going to do one that it's a parable about this guy who does really well with his money in one sense, but in another sense, he doesn't, because what's really going on in his heart, in some way, he is searching, right? He is searching for a meaningful life, and yet his mindset around how he sees money, it's like it's getting in the way of that. And so I want to look at that parable here this morning, but let me set it up with this, because thinking about what we're going to go over here, it reminded me of a time when I had a conversation, actually like multiple conversations that went on for like a day with someone that I had just met. It was this long hiking trip, and with a group of guys that I knew maybe half of them, and then a few like, you knew someone who knew someone who knew someone. And one of the guys that I'd never met before, we got to talking, and he was this incredible entrepreneur. Like, he had started all these different companies, and as he shared about them, it's like, man, like he is like really successful at this and has made lots of money and like always on to the next thing. He owned a banana farm in Africa for a little while. It just did all these crazy things, but like he had like the Midas touch, and it could make them work. But as we kept on talking, it's like, I was fascinated at first, and maybe you've experienced this, where suddenly there was that fascinating thing, but the story didn't go any deeper than that. The story never went past the success of one of the businesses that he had started or what he had done. And he was always trying to outdo the last thing that he had done on this. And it was kind of like this was always that pursuit of like, okay, what's the good life? What's the meaningful life that I long for, that I would want in this? And it's like the more he became successful, it was like he was a little bit further away from the very thing that he wanted most in a kind of life that was meaningful. Ever thought about, like, if someone were to say, what is the meaningful life for you? What would you say makes life rich and good and like worth living and wonderful? Like, and sometimes we can look at that, and I think money can maybe get in the way of that. It can help it, but it can also get in the way of it. And I just watched as something was going on. In fact, there was one moment at the end of the day, and we were having dinner, and he was talking about like, oh my gosh, this is like the good life. And it's because we were sitting at this table, and there was all of this conversation going on where you could tell he loved it. And I remember talking to him right after that, and he expressed that it had been decades since he had experienced something like that. And it hit me as being sad, because he was missing something out of his life, but it wasn't for lack of pursuing hard what he thought he wanted. Yet the thing that he was leaning into the most wasn't giving him the thing that he wanted. And that's the sad thing. And part of it, I would look back and I would say, I wonder if he felt like money was the meaning of life. Because in one sense, it can buy wonderful things, but in another sense, it's never fully enough. And I think we get pulled into that easier than we realize. Was just made aware of it was an informal survey done of middle schoolers at a middle school, and they surveyed all the middle schoolers just kind of for fun of like, okay, what do you want most out of life? Where are you headed? Kind of, as you're thinking about high school and beyond high school, what do you want? And this was recently, over 60% of the middle schoolers, their answer was to have more money, needed more money. And again, nothing wrong with saying, I would like to have more money or to have money. But when you look at like, what would I want out of life, somehow equating money as being the answer to that, where it's like money becomes the meaning of life, that maybe it's off a little bit and it's not gonna give what you want. You know, it's crazy as I think about this, all the years that I've been in ministry, and there've been many times where I get to have conversations with people near the end of their life, just through pastoring or because I've known them a long time, or it's sometimes not very long. And you get a sense with people where they're at the end of their life and they're processing, right, their life and what was valuable, what was meaningful out of life. And you know what never gets talked about, what I don't ever hear, is people talking about how much money they have or what they made. Like that's, they think of other things. There's the difference that they made. There's relationships. There's these connections. They inevitably want to see and think about how the story of their life connects into a larger story, a story of other people. For Christians, it's about like, how did my story connect into the larger story that God was telling all around me? And again, it's not like money is bad. It's just, if money becomes the meaning of life, I don't know that you get what you really want out of it. And that's what we're gonna see in this parable that Jesus teaches. And my hope would be that as we look through this parable that he teaches, you get this mindset. And again, not like, oh my gosh, money is bad and terrible, but you'll get a mindset that will actually set you up in a really beautiful way for the life that you would want, a life of meaning. And I would put it this way. I think when you look through Jesus' story, one of my hopes is, one of your takeaways would be, money can add meaning to life, but it's not the meaning of life. Let me say that again. Money can add meaning to life, but it's not the meaning of life. And when we get those mixed up, I don't know that it takes us where we really want to go or where you want to go. So here's what I want to do. I want to walk through this parable that Jesus teaches about this guy. And there are two ironies that just kind of stick out in this parable that he teaches. And I think there's some real wisdom as we understand the irony and then kind of the lesson that flows out of this irony. So we're going to look at these two ironies out of this parable, and then I'm going to kind of wrap it up here. So turn with me to the Gospel of Luke. This is where this parable is found. It's in Luke chapter 12. If you don't have a Bible or a phone or anything, we'll put the verses up on the screen, but let me set it up here. Luke chapter 12, Jesus is dealing with all the stress and the difficulties that we face as human beings, and he's trying to recenter us in his kingdom, into trusting and following God by faith. And so in the middle of this teaching that he's doing, there is a guy in the audience who asks him a question. And that's where he tells this parable. And his question is centered on this idea that I've got this problem, right? And Jesus is talking about all the anxiety and the trouble that we face. And he's like, my brother-in-law, or my brother and I are in this like argument, this fight, because he won't share the inheritance in the right way. And he's got all this stress about the money side of this. And somehow Jesus understands how this guy is coming at this. He's missing something. He's thinking about money with a mindset that's going to mess up the thing he really wants in this situation. And so it's in that context that he tells this story. So starting in verse 16, here's what he says. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? So this is this parable that Jesus teaches. Now, let me start off with just saying what it's not trying to do, because sometimes people will look at this and they go, So it seems like it was kind of a wise decision that if he's got this abundance of this crop he's just gonna let it rot out in the fields, or it just seems like that's wise financial, stewardship that he's doing here. But here's the thing, Jesus isn't trying to teach about wise investments. So don't base your premise for making a wise investment off of this. He's not talking about how to handle money or invest money. He's talking about a mindset that we take in this. And his whole point in this is there's gonna be a mindset that will actually help you to experience a kind of life that you really want. And there's a kind of mindset about money that will actually keep you from what you want in this. That's what he's gonna drive at. And he's gonna do it around these kind of two ironies here. So let me set up the first irony. So the first thing is, this starts off with this very subtle thing that happens at the beginning that can be easily missed. And I wanna get at it by asking this question. What yielded the abundant harvest that this man had, right? He gets this abundant harvest. What yielded that? Because most often our first reaction would be, well, it was his wise timing, right? He knew when to plant the seeds, or he worked the field like he's a pro farmer. He's like, what is it? Well, when you look at the very first sentence of this story, it says the ground. Look at verse 6 or 16. The ground yielded an abundant harvest. And it's like he's missed this in this moment. What's fascinating to me is even the grammar points to the insight of this idea here. It emphasizes it. So in the grammar of this very first sentence, you know what is not the subject of the sentence? The protagonist of the story. This man is the protagonist of the story. We're gonna go through, and everything through this whole story is about this man. Opening sentence, we would normally see the protagonist through a story like this be the subject of the very first sentence, and it's not. When you go back to the grammar in the Greek, the field is the subject of this sentence. And it's this subtle way of sending this message that what this guy has missed is that, and again, this is not to take away from all of his hard work. This is not to take away from his wisdom about what to plant, when to plant it, whatever. He was maybe a genius in that. Doesn't take anything away. But he missed what the ground had done, right? This is the bigger story. What God had done, what the rain had done. Right? The nutrients in the soil. I bet this guy has a bunch of workers or servants that serve on his farm, and I bet they did a lot of work as well. All of a sudden, it's like there's this bigger story of all these other things going on. And what Jesus is revealing to us is he just doesn't see the larger story. He misses that. So here's what happens. Because he misses that, all of the choices that he's going to make through the rest of the story flow out of not seeing that there's this abundance that didn't come from him necessarily. He was a part of it, but he misses this other stuff. So he keeps making all of these choices ignorant of this bigger picture. And so all of a sudden he starts seeing a very small story because his story doesn't sit in a larger story of the goodness and the beauty and the abundance and the desires of God in this. That's all missed. And that creates a problem for him because that mindset shifts him towards another mindset that we see in this. In fact, we see it in his first reaction. His first reaction to this is found in verse 17. And here's what it says, right? He says, first words, I have no place to store my crops. I got a problem, right? First thing he says is, I've got no place. I made too much money. What am I gonna do, right? Go to the doctor, you leave the appointment. He's like, oh man, well, that's never happened. What am I gonna do now? My cholesterol is like too low. Guess I'm gonna have to start eating donuts for breakfast or something. Man, right? It's like all of a sudden, it's like there's this fantastic news, but he's living out of a small story. And so his first choices flow out of, I got a problem. He's already got scarcity out of a story of abundance. And it's like, how do you get there? Small story, right? And that's what's happening here. And here's the thing, right? Having more isn't a large enough, the need to have more is never a large enough story to create a meaningful life, friends. If the story of your life is always the next thing, I need more because I don't have enough, that'll never be a story that for you will satisfy what you desire. When I asked you a little while ago, what do you see as a meaningful life? I don't think you'll experience that if your story is about always needing more. Because if more is the story you're telling yourself in your life, you will always be struggling with enough. And that just comes to dominate. And that's what happens to this guy. And so now he gets into this whole thing and he's got to go tear down those other barns, and he goes like this through this whole thing. And I point this out, like when I see this, I realize, that could happen to me. That could happen to any of us, that we miss that bigger story. And all of a sudden we start seeing the problems. And it's not that there's not problems there. This is what Jesus is not saying is pretend like you don't have problems. Really spiritual people pretend like they don't have problems. That's not the point. His point is keep that bigger story. So let me offer some application to this that I think would be important. First one is this, and we have given this application in the past before, and we're gonna give it again because you just see it all throughout Scripture, these moments where it pulls us in, and it's this: cultivate a sense of gratefulness for whatever you have, and again, not to say you don't have problems, but cultivate gratefulness. Take time in your life to think about what are the things that you go, that's good. I've got a friend there and that's good. Something, I was blessed in this way. Maybe it was in a material way or whatever it was. Maybe you had the good doctor's appointment and you've had a string of bad ones and now you're a good one. It's just be grateful for those things. And it's amazing what happens when we start shaping our mind to be grateful because it keeps pulling you into a larger story that God is a part of. So second thing with the application on this one is this: notice the story around you that is worth investing in, right? Is gratefulness pulls you out to see all of these things that you're like, man, I'm really fortunate because of this. Keep looking out there and ask yourself, what is there that I could connect my story to that is worth investing in? What are the good things? What is God doing in the world around me? Maybe it's with people. Maybe I think about what we did a few months ago with Love Our City. And it's just okay, there's an opportunity. There's something worth us investing in. And I promise you, we all have those opportunities around us all of the time. We just need to look for them in there, okay? So now, the second irony. Let me shift one more gear here, and I want to talk about the second irony that plays into this whole mindset with this. And let me set it up in this way. I want to do a little exercise, right? I'm gonna read you some little bitty short excerpts from the story. And as I read through some of these little excerpts, I want you to see if you can detect a pattern of some sort that comes out of what I read here. So let me read these, see if you can catch the pattern. Starts off, here's the first one. He thought of himself, ... right? Then he goes on, what shall I do? And he goes on, I have no, and then he goes on, what I'll do is, he goes on, I will tear down and I will store, I will say to myself. Detect a pattern there? Yeah, I, right? In fact, I don't know of another parable or story that Jesus tells that has so many moments where there's a character in the story that says I so many times as this one. He's so focused on this and what's happening. But it makes sense when you understand where he's coming from. Because if you can't see the larger story out there, if you've not cultivated gratefulness, if you've not cultivated eyes to try and ask yourself, is there something out there worth me investing in? Here's what will happen inevitably. Instead of connecting your story outward to that larger story, right, out there, you will always turn your story inward, and it'll become a small story about I, me. It's just, that's what happens. It's natural. It's also interesting in the context of the first century, how families worked and these family farms and stuff worked. Even if he was the guy that had full authority to make all of the decisions that he made there, Jesus's listeners would have been a little bit aghast at how this guy simply makes these decisions on his own. And he uses the phrase, I thought to myself, and then I made the decision. In other words, he is isolating further and further and further. Like there's this kind of isolation that is taking place, and this guy doesn't even understand what's happening. And then the story goes on, and you see the result of this. Look at verse 20. It says this, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Now, this is not punishment. This is not like Jesus is saying, this guy spent his money in a way God didn't want, and so God sent the grim reaper to show him a thing. That's not what's going on here. Jesus is telling this story, and for us to really see, right? This man is passionate about finding that life filled with meaning. So what he does is he wraps it all up, right? The grim reaper shows up because it draws his whole life, because we're looking, what has this mindset done for his life? Well, let's see. He gets to the end of his life. He's lived this out. And what do we have here? And so the whole point is he prepared all of this stuff, but did he get what he really wanted, what he was trying to prepare for himself? No, because he was constantly like chasing this thing and never got there. Here's the irony. Here's the irony that I want you to see in this one. His devotion to make his life all about him keeps him from a meaningful life. He makes his life all about him. He is dedicated to it. And it's not like there's anything he does wrong there. There's no place where we go, ooh, that was immoral or that was mean or bad. It's just I, me. Little bitty story. And it's not the story that he wanted for himself, see? And God's just saying, right? Because God's like, I want something more from you. And the irony is the way he pursued it actually kept him from the very thing that he wanted in all of this. And here's the reality of this. I think this points to this deeper lesson that none of us should miss. And it's the way God wired we human beings to be. There's something deep in us. We were wired to long for a sense of purpose or meaningfulness or connection to something bigger than ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that. That's part of maybe what it is to be created in the image of God. We want to have our lives connected with a sense of purpose or meaningfulness or something that's bigger than just our stories. It's why when I sit with someone near the end of their lives, what they talk about are those moments where they felt their story being bigger. It puts a smile, even when they know death is coming soon, they will smile and laugh at the thought of how their life is going to be carried on in some beautiful way relationally, or something they invest in some way where they go, you know what? God used me to make the world a little bit brighter, a little bit more beautiful, a little bit more wonderful. And they sit there and they will talk about that all day long because because they feel it. Yeah, it's a life worth living. But they don't talk about, I achieved this, I achieved that, that all just kind of fades. And that's what Jesus is he's trying to get us to see this. I want you to think about, when you're at the end of your life, are you making choices now about how you spend your money that actually contribute to that, what you really want? Or is it really just a distraction? Is it really just chasing money as if money is the meaning of life? Because it's not. It can add meaning because of how you invest it, how you spend it, what you do with it, right? And so he wraps it up with this little commentary. He finishes the story, and then Jesus gives this short commentary. I want you to see this. Look at verse 21. He says this: "This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." And again, he's not saying this as a punishment or as like shame on you. He's saying it as like a reality check, right? Because when he says, but is not rich toward God, he's not saying that because he's like, well, God has been really short on some stuff. And if you don't pay up, God's not going to have enough. God doesn't need that. Jesus is teaching this because who needs it? I need it. And you need it, right? He's saying if we assume that Jesus cares deeply about us, and we assume that Jesus knows better than us how we were made, how we were wired to be connected to a larger story, to God's story. Jesus is saying, be rich with God, right? And the idea of being rich with God is connecting to his story. I'm not gonna make it I, me. I'm gonna be intentional about doing something that will bring a richness to me. Here's another irony, right? In being rich with God, we bring a richness to ourselves because we turn our story outward and we connect it in this deeper way. See? So let me offer a couple of things of application with this one. And the first one is this, and it's really kind of a reflective question. Ask yourself this question. Is the story you're telling with your life bigger than just you? Think about that. Is the story of your life, is it bigger than you? Is there, what would it look like for your story to become bigger than you? Which leads to the second point, and it's this. And I'm going to make this one as a challenge, okay? Be generous with giving to God's story. Because that's the story you want to be a part of. Be generous with that. Think about how you can be generous in connecting to that larger story. It's interesting. I shared that story at the beginning about, someone that I had met who wildly successful, and I mean very successful by human standards with all the different businesses that he had started and everything. But in my own mind, I contrasted that with some other stories. I think of one story in particular of someone I have known for a long, long time who also very successful by worldly standards. The amount of money this couple has made, amazing. And I've gotten to know them over a lot of years. And I think of other couples that I know like this, that are very good at being able to make money or be successful. And I think about some of these other couples, and I think about this one in particular. And I have watched their journey, and I've watched their generosity only grow over time. And I'd always admired it. And then somewhere in there, I realized it started to inspire me. I would watch them just care about people. I remember the husband who I know well, who just always kept looking for moments where he could make a difference. always wondering, maybe God put something in my path and there's something I can make a difference with. And I just watched as his heart became more and more generous. And I watched as how life became fuller and fuller for him. And he would say this, not because he had more money, but because it just the relational connections, the connections of what God might be doing next through something that he got to be a part of. And he would be the first person that would go, what I have in material possessions, oh man, I got lucky. God's blessed me. God's blessed me way beyond what he just has embraced that idea that the land did it, God did it, the rain did it, the market did it. And he's brilliant at this stuff, but humble. But the biggest thing is I've watched as it has inspired me and my wife and other people, there's something contagious in a beautiful way about it. And I've looked and I've said, I want to be more like that. Because I think it helps create more of the life that I would want for me. In a weird way, here's another irony, right? It's almost selfish in a selfless way, that the more selfless you are in being generous, in a selfish way, it actually helps produce a kind of life that is enriching to you in there. And I just want us to look at what Jesus teaches here and ask ourselves, do I trust Jesus that he knows what he's talking about, or does he not? And I can just tell you from a lot of years and watching a lot of people, I think Jesus knows what he's talking about. And that's why I want to challenge all of us to be generous with seeking to connect to God's story in this world. And I think about this like with us as a church. I think about whether it is about what God would do in and through us in this place, right? The beautiful things that we would invest in as a community in this room, but also like in the rooms where our kids are or our youth are or adults or what God's doing there, but also as a church that comes together and says, how do we connect to God's story in this city, right? Like I think about what we did on Love Our City weekend, and it's about being a community of people that is saying God has this big story, and as we come together, let's be a part of that larger story. And this would be my desire in a just in a personal way. I would want this church to be a place and a kind of community that you would see, that more and more people would see as a wise place to invest into the larger story of God's kingdom. That we as a church will make decisions about what does it look like to connect to that story. Because I think that will help all of us to experience a deeper, more meaningful kind of life and walk with Christ. So as a church, I'm gonna just close out with this thought, right? We exist to love people into the acceptance and freedom of Jesus Christ. And we want to do that in the most tangible of ways. We do not sit back from afar and just say it. We want to be a church that lives it out, and that how we spend our money, we, right, not just the church money, but we that belong to this church, that we see that as a way to invest and a mindset that leads us to a beautiful place, but that someday we'll look back on and go, man, I love that I'm connected to how God was moving in and through my community and into our city and into the globe. Be a part of that, friends. Father, we just thank you that you are such a good God, and we love this story of redemption and love and freedom and acceptance that you are telling in this world of ours. And I pray that you just keep showing us how to step into that story with you, that in ways that just fill our hearts with getting to be a part of your beautiful, beautiful plan. And we pray this in your son's name. Amen. Have a great Sunday. See you next week.